Hello everyone and welcome back to your worst nightmare YouTube channel. To help us feel even more connected as a community, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from. If you would like to share some of your horror encounter, do well to email us through the description of this video. Don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Thanks. Now, back to today's episode. If you've never worked the graveyard shift at a gas station, let me sum it up for you. It's mostly boredom sprinkled with the occasional "what the hell just happened" moment. You get strange people, odd requests, and the kind of loneliness that makes you question why you're not, I don't know, bartending or something. But what happened on my shift last month? That was beyond anything I was ready for. It started like any other night, quiet, empty, the highway stretching out into the darkness like it led to nowhere. I was halfway through my midnight snack, a very gourmet gas station sandwich that tasted as bad as it looked, and just trying to make it through the night without dozing off behind the counter. The store was dead, no customers for at least an hour. Just me, a few flickering fluorescent lights, and the haunting knowledge that our bathroom out back hadn't been cleaned since Tuesday. That's when a truck pulled in. An old, rusted pickup, the kind that looks like it's held together by duct tape and a prayer. It parked by the pumps, but no one got out. I waited, watching the headlights flicker off, the engine cutting out. Still, nobody moved. After about 5 minutes, I figured whoever was in there had fallen asleep at the wheel or was debating whether or not to brave our questionable bathroom situation. I stood up, leaning over the counter. "Hey, you good out there?" No answer. Now, under normal circumstances, I'd mind my business. But there's only so much you can take when it's 2 a.m., and the only human interaction you've had all night is an old truck idling in your parking lot. So, I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside, the chilly air hitting me like a slap in the face. The truck was still, but the door on the driver's side was slightly ajar. "Hello?" I called out, stepping closer. I leaned in to get a better look and tapped the door with my flashlight. It swung open, creaking like the start of a bad horror movie. The driver's seat was empty, but here's the weird part. There were groceries on the passenger seat. Fresh ones. Like, fresh. I'm talking bread that wasn't stale, eggs that hadn't seen the inside of a fridge for a week, and a couple of apples that actually looked edible. I glanced around. There was no sign of anyone. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe the guy just went for a walk. Maybe he's stretching his legs. Maybe he had to, I don't know, use the gas station bathroom in a life or death situation. But there's no way he slipped past me, and besides, the doors to the store hadn't opened all night. I shined my flashlight toward the back of the station, scanning the darkness for any sign of the driver. The lot was empty except for my car and a few stray cats that had made the dumpster their unofficial kingdom. "All right, this is officially weird," I muttered under my breath, turning back to the truck. I thought about calling the police, but I also didn't want to be that guy. You know, the guy who calls 911 for something dumb and ends up on one of those reality cop shows where they make you explain why you're freaking out over a grocery-filled ghost truck. So, I decided to go back inside and wait it out. Maybe the guy would come back, finish pumping gas, and be on his merry way. As soon as I turned around to head back to the store, I heard the unmistakable sound of a grocery bag rustling behind me. I whipped around, my heart doing a little tap dance in my chest, and there he was, a man, standing next to the truck, holding a carton of eggs like it was the most normal thing in the world. Where do you come from?" I asked, taking a step back, gripping the flashlight a little tighter. He looked up at me, his face blank, like he hadn't even realized I was there. "Needed eggs," he mumbled. His voice was slow, almost robotic. I blinked. "Yeah, I see that. But, you weren't here a second ago. I mean, your truck's been parked here, and you just appeared." He stared at me, unblinking, holding the eggs like a lifeline. I was always here. I couldn't tell if he was messing with me or if I'd officially lost it. No, you weren't. I checked the truck. It was empty. You've got a trunk full of groceries and nowhere to be. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was processing my words through some kind of slow-motion filter. Always here, he repeated. All right. This guy was either having a stroke or was the strangest shopper I'd ever seen. I was about to suggest that maybe he'd take his groceries and get going, but then I noticed something that made me freeze. His shoes. They were caked in mud. Not just a little mud, but the kind you get after walking through a swamp. The kind of thick, sludgy mess that didn't come from around here. We hadn't had any rain in weeks, and the nearest patch of mud was miles away. Where'd you come from? I asked again, this time with a little more edge in my voice. He blinked, slow and deliberate, and then, without another word, he turned and started walking toward the road. Not the parking lot. Not the gas station. The road. And he just kept walking. The egg still in his hand, his back to me, as if our conversation never happened. I watched him until he disappeared into the darkness, leaving his old truck parked by the pumps, engine off, groceries sitting untouched on the passenger seat. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I climbed into his truck and checked the back. It was mostly empty, except for one thing. A pair of boots. Mud-caked, just like the ones on his feet. Except these were larger. And there was a faded patch on the side that read, "Property of State Prison." I dropped the boots like they were on fire, jumped out of the truck, and bolted back inside the station. I didn't care how crazy it sounded. I was calling the cops. They showed up about an hour later, checked the truck, ran the plates, the whole deal. Turns out the truck was reported stolen 2 days earlier, and it had been found abandoned in the same spot where an inmate had escaped from a nearby prison. They didn't tell me much more, just that they were looking into it. I haven't seen that guy since, but sometimes, when I'm out in the parking lot late at night, I swear I can still hear the sound of a grocery bag rustling in the wind. I've considered switching to day shifts. Or, bartending. I never thought the overnight shift at a gas station could be anything but boring. Routine. Quiet. The kind of job where you count down the hours by the number of coffee cups you refill. I wasn't prepared for how quickly things could go wrong. It was a Wednesday night, just past midnight, and the sky was pitch black, no moon, no stars. The place was dead. The only sound was the hum of the coolers and the occasional creak of the old building settling. My phone had just run out of battery, so there was nothing left to do but stare at the clock, waiting for my shift to end. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard the chime of the door as it slid open. I looked up, expecting a lone trucker or maybe a couple of teenagers coming in for snacks, but instead, a man walked in wearing a dark rain jacket, despite there being no rain. His hood was pulled up, hiding most of his face, but I could see enough to know he was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying stubble along his jawline. He didn't say anything as he entered. Just headed straight for the back of the store where the bathrooms were. I barely even noticed at first. Lots of people stop in late at night, use the facilities, and leave. But something about the way he moved seemed off. Like he was in a hurry, but trying hard not to show it. I went back to rearranging the candy display, figuring he'd be out in a few minutes and then I'd have the place to myself again. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. 15. I glanced at the bathroom door and still no sign of him. "Hey, you good in there?" I called out, trying to sound casual, but getting that uneasy feeling in my gut. No response. Just silence. I walked over and knocked on the door. "Sir, everything all right?" Still nothing. Now, I've heard stories about people passing out in public bathrooms, drugs, medical issues, you name it. My mind started racing through worst-case scenarios, so I figured I'd check. I had the key to unlock it, but I hesitated, that creeping sense of something being wrong tightening in my chest. Finally, I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. When I pushed it open, the bathroom was empty. No man. No sign that anyone had been in there at all. I stepped back, confused, checking the hallway to see if maybe he'd slipped out without me noticing. Nothing. The bathroom was small. There wasn't anywhere to hide. The windows were too small for anyone to crawl through, and the air was thick with the smell of bleach from when I'd cleaned it earlier. The guy had just disappeared. I closed the door, my heart beating faster now. Maybe he'd just left the store while I wasn't looking. I walked back to the front, glanced at the security monitors, and rewound the footage. The camera outside showed him pulling into the lot, stepping out of his car, and walking inside. But then the footage skipped. A glitch. Just a split second, but it was enough to miss something. After that skip, his car was still there, parked by the entrance. But there was no footage of him leaving. No footage of him walking back out the door. He just vanished. I was getting that prickling feeling on the back of my neck now, the kind that tells you something's wrong even if you don't know what it is yet. I checked the cameras again, scanning through every angle, but the man was gone. I glanced outside. His car was still sitting in the lot, untouched. I stepped back from the monitors, trying to wrap my head around it. I was on the verge of calling my manager, or maybe even the cops, but I didn't want to sound crazy. What was I going to say, anyway? Hey, a guy walked into the bathroom and disappeared. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. I told myself it was just a tech issue, some kind of camera malfunction, but I couldn't shake that feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. I tried to push it out of my mind, convincing myself that I was overreacting. The storm outside must have been messing with the system, that's all. I sat back behind the counter, keeping an eye on the front door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. That's when I heard the sound. It was faint at first. A slow, deliberate scraping noise, like metal against metal. My pulse quickened as I realized it was coming from the storage room, just behind the counter. We had some old shelving back there and a couple of broken freezers we hadn't gotten rid of yet. No one was supposed to be back there. I stood up, the hairs on my arms standing on end as I grabbed the keys and unlocked the door to the storage room. I opened it slowly, half expecting to find something, or someone, inside. But just like the bathroom, it was empty. The shelves were dusty, and nothing seemed out of place. Except for the smell. It was faint, but unmistakable. The smell of dirt. Wet, freshly turned soil. It filled the air, as if the ground had just been dug up and dumped inside the storage room. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, my mind racing. There was no dirt in there before. How could there be? The room was clean, or at least as clean as it gets in a gas station. That's when I noticed something else. Footprints. They were faint, muddy prints on the tile floor, leading from the storage room toward the back of the store. They hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. I followed the trail, my hands shaking. The footprints led toward the back wall, where there was nothing but an old vending machine that had been out of order for months. I stared at it for a moment, confused, before I realized that the footprints stopped there. Just stopped. I moved closer, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. There was no way someone could fit behind that machine, but it didn't make sense for the trail to end there. I leaned down, shining my flashlight on the floor, hoping to see something, anything that could explain what was going on. And then I heard it again. The scraping. This time, it was louder. Closer. I jumped back, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it, a hand. A pale, bony hand, slowly reaching out from behind the vending machine, the fingers caked with dirt. I stumbled backward, knocking into a shelf and sending a box of chips crashing to the floor. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing, but I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. The hand slid further out, followed by an arm, and then I saw his face, the man from the bathroom. His eyes were wide open, but they were empty. Hollow. He dragged himself out from behind the machine, his mouth slightly open as if he was trying to speak but couldn't find the words. I bolted. Ran straight out of the store into the pouring rain, my feet slipping on the wet pavement as I fumbled for my car keys. I didn't stop until I was in the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I sat there, soaked, shaking, watching the gas station through the rain-smeared windshield. I half expected to see him standing at the window, staring back at me. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty store. When the cops arrived later, they didn't find anything. No footprints, no dirt, and no sign of the man. His car was gone, too, as if it had never been there at all. I quit the next day. I don't know what I saw that night, but I'll never go back to find out. Working the night shift at a gas station wasn't supposed to be interesting. I liked it that way. Quiet nights, the occasional traveler, a few truckers coming through for coffee. That was the usual rhythm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Plus, it's the kind of job where nobody expects too much from you, and I was fine with that. It was around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the dead zone of the night. No cars had pulled in for at least an hour, and I was sitting behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, bored out of my mind. The storm outside was picking up, heavy rain pounding against the windows, and lightning flashing in the distance. I had just started another round of checking social media when I heard a faint tapping sound, like someone lightly knocking on the window. It was so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. I glanced up, expecting to see some random customer trying to get my attention, but the parking lot was empty. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. I stood up, staring out into the rain-soaked lot. Still nothing. The wind howled, pushing the rain sideways, making it hard to see past the flickering lights outside. I figured it was the storm playing tricks on my ears, so I sat back down. Then, a knock, louder this time, clear as day. It came from the side window, the one just out of view from the counter. I felt a chill run down my spine as I slowly stood up again, my eyes locking onto the window. And there she was. A woman stood just outside, drenched from head to toe. Her long, dark hair was plastered to her face, and her clothes clung to her like she'd been standing in the rain for hours. She wasn't moving, just staring directly at me through the glass with an intensity that made my stomach turn. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her lips were slightly parted, like she was about to speak but couldn't find the words. I froze for a second, not sure how to react. Customers usually come in through the front door, not creep up on the side window like they're auditioning for a horror movie. I finally snapped out of it and walked over to the door, unlocking it. "Hey, you okay out there?" I called out. The woman didn't answer. She just kept staring at me. Not at the door where I was standing, but back at the window where she'd been knocking. I stepped outside, the cold rain instantly soaking through my jacket. "Do you need help?" I asked, louder this time. She still didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes slowly shifted from the window to me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, like she just realized I was there. Then, without a word, she turned and started walking toward the road. "Wait." I called after her, but she didn't stop. She moved slowly, her feet dragging through the water pooling in the lot, like she was too exhausted to lift them properly. Something was seriously wrong. I ran back inside, grabbed my phone, and called 911. As I waited for them to pick up, I kept watching her through the rain-spattered glass. She was halfway across the parking lot now, heading straight for the highway. There was no way she was going to make it out there in this storm. 911, what's your emergency? I quickly explained the situation, the woman, the rain, her strange behavior. They told me to stay inside and that they'd send someone over. I hung up and went back to the door, trying to keep an eye on her. She had almost reached the edge of the lot, and then she stopped. Just stopped, right in the middle of the road. The headlights of a truck flashed in the distance, growing brighter as it barreled down the highway, the driver probably not even able to see her through the downpour. I threw the door open and ran toward her. Hey, get out of the road. She didn't move. I was sprinting now, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement. I wasn't going to make it in time. The truck's horn blared, but she didn't react at all. She just stood there, motionless. At the last second, the truck swerved, missing her by inches. The driver didn't even stop, just kept going, probably too freaked out by what had almost happened. I finally reached her, grabbing her arm and pulling her out of the street. Are you trying to get yourself killed? I shouted, my voice barely audible over the storm. She blinked slowly, as if she was just waking up from a dream, and looked at me with the most vacant expression I've ever seen. Up close, I could see just how pale she was, her skin almost translucent, lips blue from the cold. You shouldn't be out here, she whispered, her voice raspy and weak. I stared at her, stunned. What are you talking about? You're the one standing in the middle of the road. She shook her head slowly, her eyes flickering toward the gas station. No, not me. Him. A chill ran through me. Who? There's no one else here. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled her arm free from my grip and started walking again, this time toward the side of the building, where the dumpsters were. I watched her for a second, then followed. I didn't know why, but I couldn't just let her wander off again. She disappeared around the corner of the building, and when I rounded it myself, she was standing by the dumpsters, staring down at the ground. What are you doing? I asked, rainwater dripping into my eyes. She didn't look at me. He's here. Gruel. I was starting to lose patience. She pointed to a spot near the dumpsters, just behind them where the light barely reached. At first, I didn't see anything, just wet pavement and trash bags. But then, as I got closer, I saw it. There was something lying on the ground, half hidden by a pile of garbage. I knelt down, my stomach churning as I reached for the edge of the tarp that covered it. It was heavy, whatever it was, and when I finally pulled it back, I saw him. A man, maybe in his 30s, with a deep gash across his forehead. His eyes were open, staring blankly up at the sky, his skin pale and lifeless. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. What the? He's been here for days, the woman said quietly, still staring down at the body. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The storm, the woman, the body, none of it made sense. You need to come with me inside, I stammered, backing away. We need to wait for the police. She finally looked up at me, her eyes glassy and distant. I'm already gone. And just like that, she walked back into the rain, disappearing into the darkness. When the police finally arrived, they found the body, but they never found her. They searched everywhere, through the storm, down the highway, even into the nearby fields, but she was gone. No one had seen her arrive, and no one saw her leave. I still don't know who she was or how she knew about the body. All I know is that night, something more than just a storm passed through that gas station. And I haven't worked a night shift since. It's funny how quiet a gas station can get after midnight. You'd think there would be a hum from the fridges or the low buzz of fluorescent lights, but no, nothing. Just silence. I've worked here for almost 2 years, the night shift mostly, and you'd think by now I'd be used to the stillness. But tonight felt different. It was just me and the occasional sound of my own shoes squeaking on the freshly mopped tiles. That's when a car pulled up, an old, beat-up sedan with its engine coughing like it was 1 mile away from a breakdown. It rolled to a stop by pump 3, and I squinted through the glass, expecting someone to hop out. No one did. I watched for a solid 2 minutes. No movement. That creeping feeling started to crawl up my spine, the one where you know something's off, but you can't put your finger on what. The station security lights flickered, adding to the unease. Finally, I grabbed my jacket, figuring I'd go outside and check. Maybe they needed help. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the first thing I noticed was the driver. A woman, hunched over the steering wheel, her forehead resting against the glass. I couldn't tell if she was passed out or just tired, but the closer I got, the more I realized something wasn't right. Her car door was slightly ajar, hanging open like she hadn't bothered to close it all the way. "Ma'am," I called out. "Everything okay?" No response. I took a step closer, the hair on my arm standing up. "Hey, do you need?" Before I could finish, the woman's head jerked up violently, and she stared straight ahead through the windshield. Her eyes were wide open, but there was something off about them, glassy, unfocused, like she was staring through me, not at me. "Ma'am." I tried again, louder this time. Suddenly, she slammed the door shut and floored it, tires screeching against the asphalt. The car shot forward but veered hard to the left, crashing into the empty field just beyond the gas station. My heart was pounding now. What the hell just happened? I ran back inside and grabbed the phone to call 911. As I dialed, I glanced out the window at the wreck. The car was halfway into the ditch, steam rising from the hood. Then I saw it. The passenger door was open, swinging back and forth in the wind. But there was no one in the passenger seat. Now, here's the thing. When the car first pulled up, there was no one else in it. Just the woman. I was sure of it. So who the hell had opened that door? The dispatcher's voice on the other end snapped me out of my thoughts. I quickly explained what happened, and they said they'd send someone out. I was about to hang up when I noticed movement by the car. A man, dressed in dark clothes, emerged from the field next to the wreck. I froze, watching as he calmly walked over to the woman's car, leaned in through the open driver's window, and did something. I couldn't tell what, but it looked like he was checking her pulse or something. "Sir, can you stay on the line?" the dispatcher asked, clearly sensing the tension in my voice. Yeah," I muttered, eyes glued to the man. The weird thing was, he didn't seem concerned. He wasn't running to help her or calling for assistance. He was just inspecting. Like this was part of some routine for him. Then he slowly turned his head in my direction, and even though I was still inside the station, I felt like he was staring straight at me. "Someone's here," I whispered into the phone, backing away from the window. "Who?" "A bystander," the dispatcher asked. "I don't know. He came out of nowhere. He's looking right at me." The man stood there, perfectly still, just staring at the gas station. Then, as casually as if he were strolling through a park, he walked back into the field and disappeared into the darkness. "Police are on their way." "Stay inside and lock the doors," the dispatcher instructed. I didn't need to be told twice. I locked up every door, even the back one that led to the storage room. After that, I turned off all the lights inside the store. It wasn't smart, I know, but the idea of him seeing me in the bright fluorescent glow freaked me out. I wanted to stay hidden. Minutes felt like hours as I crouched behind the counter, waiting for the sound of sirens. Every so often, I'd peek up at the window, half expecting to see the man again, watching from the edge of the field. Then the woman appeared. She was out of her car, standing in the parking lot, but she wasn't walking toward the station. She just stood there, her back to me, her head hanging low. The longer I watched, the more I realized her posture was all wrong, like she wasn't holding herself up. Her arms hung limp at her sides, and her legs seemed too rigid. I'm not ashamed to say I was terrified. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was the dispatcher asking for an update, but I didn't dare answer it. The woman started moving, but not toward the gas station. She began to walk toward the road, limping, dragging her left foot behind her like it was broken. Then she veered off, disappearing into the same field where the man had gone. I couldn't explain it, but I felt this overwhelming dread. Like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. The sirens finally broke through the silence, and the moment the police pulled up, I bolted outside. They found the car, smashed and empty. No woman. No man. No sign of anyone at all. I told the cops everything, about the car, the man, the woman, but they looked at me like I was losing it. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints, nothing. The car was registered to a woman from a neighboring town, but here's the kicker, she'd been missing for 2 weeks. They found her body 3 days later in the same field, half buried in the dirt. The coroner said she'd been dead long before that car ever pulled up to my station. I quit the next day. And honestly, I don't care if no one believes me. I know what I saw. It was 11:45 p.m., and I was about to close up. The place was dead, no customers, no cars on the road, not even the sound of crickets outside. I had the store spotless, the cooler stocked, and all that was left was to take out the trash before locking the doors. Now, I've got a thing about dumpsters. They're gross, they smell, and they're always tucked away in some poorly lit corner that screams, bad idea. But rules are rules, and I wasn't about to get written up for skipping a simple task. I grabbed the trash bags, pushed through the back door, and made my way to the dumpster behind the station. The only light was a flickering bulb that barely reached the edge of the lot, casting long shadows across the pavement. I tossed the first bag in, and just as I was about to throw the second one, I heard footsteps. Not soft ones either, heavy, deliberate, like someone didn't care if they were heard. I froze, my hands clutching the trash bag, scanning the shadows for movement. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the empty lot. No response. Just the low hum of the distant highway. I figured it was nothing, maybe an animal rustling around in the bushes, so I tossed the second bag in and started heading back inside. But as I reached for the door, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. This time, I was sure it wasn't just my imagination. I turned around, and there, at the edge of the light, I saw him. He was standing by the far corner of the parking lot, just outside the reach of the flickering light. His face was shadowed, but his posture. It was unnerving, rigid, like he was sizing me up. He didn't say a word, just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me. I laughed nervously, more to break the tension for myself than anything. "Can I help you, man?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like I wasn't already picturing 100 different ways this could go wrong. He still didn't speak. Just stared. I figured he was some drifter passing through, maybe lost or needing directions. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake it. His clothes were clean, too clean for someone wandering the highway at this hour. I turned back toward the door, and just as I grabbed the handle, I heard him speak. "You got a map?" His voice was low, gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in days. I turned back to face him, still keeping my distance. "A map?" Yeah, inside. If you come in, I can." Before I could finish, he cut me off. "No need. I'll wait here." The way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew what he wanted, a map of the town or maybe the highway, but something in my gut told me not to turn my back on him again. I'll grab it real quick, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I ducked back inside, locking the door behind me as soon as I stepped in. The front doors were already locked, so I figured I was safe for now. I walked to the counter, fumbled around under it until I found an old, folded up map we kept for truckers. As I stood there, map in hand, something caught my eye on the security monitors. The guy had moved. He was no longer standing at the edge of the lot. Instead, he was now pacing back and forth by the side of the building, like he was looking for something, maybe another way in. I watched, my heart racing, as he circled the entire gas station, pausing every few steps to glance at the windows. Hell no, I whispered to myself, setting the map down on the counter. This wasn't normal. Something was seriously off. The guy disappeared from the camera feed for a moment, and then, suddenly, he was right by the back door. The one I had just locked. He pressed his face against the glass, his hands cupped around his eyes as he peered inside. I ducked behind the counter, not daring to make a sound. My mind was racing. Should I call the cops? But what would I even tell them? Some creepy guy pacing around the lot didn't exactly scream emergency. Then I heard it, the doorknob rattling. He was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. The operator picked up, and I whispered as quietly as I could, explaining what was happening. They said they'd send someone over, but out here, in the middle of nowhere. I knew it'd take them at least 20 minutes to show up. The rattling stopped, but I wasn't relieved. If anything, the silence made things worse. I peeked over the counter at the security feed. He was still there, standing by the door, staring at it like he could will it open just by looking at it. Then, without warning, he pulled something out of his pocket. A crowbar. My heart skipped a beat as I watched him wedge it under the door, trying to pry it open. I'm in trouble, I whispered into the phone, my voice barely audible. He's trying to break in. Stay calm, sir, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. Is there anywhere safe you can go? Safe? In a gas station with glass windows everywhere? Not really. But I wasn't about to tell her that. The door creaked as the guy leaned his weight into the crowbar. I needed to act fast. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broom, and wedged it under the handle of the back door, hoping it'd hold long enough for the cops to arrive. Then I heard a loud bang. The crowbar hit the ground, and the guy let out a frustrated grunt. For a second, I thought maybe he'd give up and leave. But no. He stepped back, stared at the door one last time, and then he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill down my spine. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot, just like that. I didn't move. I just stayed crouched behind the counter, holding my breath until the cops finally showed up. By the time they arrived, the guy was long gone. They searched the area, found his crowbar, but that was it. No sign of him anywhere. The officers tried to reassure me, said it was probably just some drifter looking to steal cash or cigarettes. But I knew better. The way he acted, the way he looked at me through that door, it wasn't about money. The next day, I quit. It wasn't worth it, not for minimum wage and weirdos creeping around at midnight. It started out like any other night shift at the gas station, a quiet Tuesday evening with nothing but the hum of the refrigerators and the soft buzz of the neon open 24 hours sign to keep me company. I've been working at this little out-of-the-way spot for a few months now. Nothing exciting ever happens here, which, if I'm honest, is exactly why I took the job. It's easy money. Or at least, it was. Around 1 a.m., just as I was finishing up my second energy drink of the night, a guy walked in. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, average build, wearing a ball cap and a jacket like he'd just come off a long road trip. I didn't think much of him at first, We get a lot of late-night drivers stopping in for gas and snacks. But there was something about him that was off. He didn't look tired or distracted like most people at this hour. He looked wired. Not like too much coffee wired, but more like I haven't slept in days, and I'm one wrong move away from snapping wired. He didn't say anything when he walked in, just kind of lingered by the door, scanning the shelves like he was searching for something specific. I tried to play it cool, nodding at him as I leaned on the counter. "Anything I can help you with, man?" He didn't answer. Just stared at the candy display for a long minute before finally making his way over to the drink coolers. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he grabbed a soda, then made his way to the counter, setting it down with a shaky hand. I rang him up, feeling the tension between us grow. "Long night?" He looked up at me, and for the first time, I noticed how pale he was. His eyes were wide, darting back and forth like he was expecting someone to come through the door any second. "You could say that," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I scanned the soda, trying to make small talk. "Yeah, night shifts can be brutal." "On the road long?" He didn't answer right away. Just kept glancing toward the front window like he was waiting for something. Finally, he leaned in close, his voice so low I almost didn't catch it. "You ever get that feeling someone's following you?" Now, working nights, you hear all kinds of weird stories from lonely truckers or road-weary travelers, so I just shrugged it off. Can't say that I have. "You all right, man?" His eyes met mine, and I swear there was a mix of desperation and fear there. "You will. Trust me." Before I could respond, he tossed a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, grabbed his drink, and rushed out the door without another word. I stood there, watching as he practically jogged back to his car, a beat-up sedan parked near the pumps. He didn't even bother fueling up, just jumped in, slammed the door, and peeled out of the lot like something was chasing him. "Weird," I muttered to myself, shaking my head as I pocketed the $5. I figured that would be the end of it, just another random encounter on a slow night. But about 15 minutes later, I noticed something strange. There was a car parked just off the side of the road, barely visible in the shadows. It hadn't been there earlier. I didn't see or hear anyone pull up, but it was just sitting there, headlights off, like it had been there all night. Now, normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. Maybe someone broke down, maybe they were resting. But with what that guy said earlier, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave me. I kept glancing out the window, trying to make out if anyone was inside, but the car was too far away and too deep in the shadows. Another 10 minutes went by, and then the door to the station opened again. I looked up, expecting another late-night customer, but no one was there. The door had opened on its own. The automatic doors here are pretty old, so it's not uncommon for them to glitch and open when there's no one nearby. I figured that's what happened, but as I walked over to check, I got a strange sensation, like the temperature in the store had dropped a few degrees. The air felt heavier, like someone was holding their breath. I poked my head outside, glancing toward the car still sitting in the distance, and then back at the lot. Nothing. The wind was picking up, whistling through the trees, but aside from that, it was dead quiet. I stepped back inside, but as soon as I did, the door opened again. This time, I froze. There, standing just a few feet from the entrance, was a woman. She was dressed in a black hoodie and jeans, her long hair matted like she hadn't washed it in days. Her face was obscured by her hood, but something about her posture, her complete stillness, made every hair on my body stand on end. Can I help you?" I asked, my voice wavering. She didn't respond. Didn't move. Just stood there, her hands hanging limp at her sides. The air felt thick, like the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. "Are you okay?" I tried again, stepping forward, my instinct telling me I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. And then, without a word, she turned around and walked out. Just like that. No hesitation. No glance back. She crossed the lot slowly, walking toward the car parked on the side of the road. I watched her the entire time, feeling this overwhelming sense of dread sink in, like I knew something was about to go horribly wrong, but I didn't know what. Just as she reached the car, she stopped, standing perfectly still again. The driver's side door opened, and a man, tall, wearing a similar hoodie, got out. He didn't acknowledge her at all. He just walked around to the trunk, popped it open, and began pulling something out. Something heavy. It wasn't until he dragged it into the light from the station that I saw what it was, a large, black duffel bag, stained with dark spots. And I swear to God, it was leaking. I backed up, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They didn't even look at me. The man hoisted the bag onto his shoulder and started walking toward the woods behind the gas station. The woman followed closely behind, never lifting her head, never saying a word. I don't know what was in that bag, but I didn't stick around to find out. I locked the doors, killed the lights, and hid in the back room until my shift ended. The police didn't find anything when I called the next day. No car. No bag. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I still hear that door opening, just like it did that night, with no one there. It was one of those late August nights when the heat sticks to your skin, and even the crickets sound tired. I was working the overnight shift, which I usually don't mind because it's quiet, and the customers are either too tired or too weird to want to chat. It's a good setup for someone like me, who enjoys minding their own business. Around 2 a.m., a storm rolled in heavy rain pounding against the roof, lightning flickering in the distance. The kind of storm that makes everything feel a little too still, like the world's holding its breath. Business had been slow, just a couple of truckers passing through, grabbing coffee and heading back on the road. The rain had been so intense for the past hour that I figured I'd get a break from any new customers for a while. That's when I noticed the headlights. Dim and far away, but definitely coming toward the station, barely visible through the sheets of rain. I figured it was someone trying to get off the highway to wait out the storm, but as the car got closer, I realized it wasn't driving normally. It was swerving, just slightly, like whoever was behind the wheel couldn't keep control. I watched as the car, an old, beat-up hatchback, pulled into the parking lot and came to a stop by the farthest pump, which was strange since it was the only car there. The engine cut off, and for a while, no one got out. I could see a shape in the driver's seat, slumped over, like they were passed out or maybe just exhausted. Great, I muttered to myself, already imagining the hassle of calling an ambulance or dealing with someone who'd had too much to drink. I waited a few minutes, but the person didn't move. The rain was still coming down hard, the pounding on the roof making it hard to hear anything, so I grabbed the umbrella we kept by the door and headed out. As soon as I stepped outside, the storm hit me full force, the wind nearly pulling the umbrella out of my hands. I fought my way across the parking lot, water sloshing around my shoes, until I reached the car. I knocked on the driver's side window, but there was no reaction. The figure inside didn't budge. I knocked again, harder this time, and finally, the driver stirred. Slowly, the window rolled down, just a crack, and a pair of bloodshot eyes peeked out at me. "You all right in there?" I shouted over the storm. The driver was a man, probably mid-40s, with stubble covering his face and dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't answer right away, just blinked at me, his eyes struggling to focus. Yeah, I'm fine," he finally mumbled, his voice thick like he was trying to shake off sleep. "Just needed a break." "You need gas?" I asked, glancing at the pump. "No," he muttered. "I'm good." I waited, expecting him to say something else, but he just sat there, staring out at the rain. The whole interaction felt off, but I didn't want to push it. All right, I said, stepping back. Just checking. I turned to head back inside, but something made me stop. I don't know why, but I looked back at the car one more time. That's when I noticed it, the back seat. There was something on it. It was hard to see through the rain and the fogged up windows, but I could make out a shape wrapped in what looked like a large, blue tarp. It took a second for my brain to register what I was looking at, but once it did, my heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to do. My first thought was that maybe it was just some kind of equipment, something harmless. But the shape, it didn't look like equipment. It looked like a person. A person wrapped in a tarp. I swallowed hard and forced myself to act normal. Hey, do you need anything else? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man looked at me again, this time with more focus, like he knew I'd seen something. Nah, he said, too quickly. I'm just passing through. I nodded, my mind racing. I didn't want to ask the obvious question, the one that was screaming in my head, but I couldn't just let it go either. You sure about that? I said, forcing a smile. That looks like a lot of stuff in the back. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in them. Not fear. Not panic. Something colder. Just some old junk, he muttered, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. I'm cleaning out my storage unit. I knew he was lying. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get back inside, lock the doors, and call the cops. But I couldn't just leave it like that. I took one step closer, still trying to keep it casual. Mind if I take a look? Just making sure you're not hauling anything dangerous, you know. His eyes locked onto mine, and the air between us shifted. He stared at me for a long moment, and in that instant, I could feel the tension hanging between us like a thread, ready to snap. Look, he said, his voice low and even, I'm just trying to get through the night, same as you. So how about you mind your own business? I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared back at him, the rain pouring down around us. Part of me wanted to push, to demand he open the back seat, but another part, the smarter part, knew better. I wasn't about to get myself killed over a hunch. Yeah, no problem, I said, stepping back toward the station. Just making sure. I turned and hurried back to the door, my pulse racing. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door behind me and grabbed my phone. I kept one eye on the car as I dialed 911, explaining the situation in hushed tones. The operator told me they'd send a unit over, but it might take a while because of the storm. Great. Just what I needed. I hung up and watched as the man's car sat there, engine still off, headlights dark. For a long time, nothing happened. He just stayed there, motionless, like he was waiting for something. I kept hoping he'd leave, just drive away before the cops arrived. But he didn't. 15 minutes later, the police arrived. 2 squad cars pulled up, their blue lights flashing through the rain. I watched from inside as the officers approached the man's car, hands resting on their holsters. I could see them talking to him, asking him questions, but I couldn't hear anything over the storm. Then one of the officers opened the back door. What happened next was a blur. The cops pulled the man out of the car and slammed him against the hood, cuffing him as he started shouting loud, angry, unintelligible. I watched as they opened the trunk and back door, their faces hardening when they saw what was inside. Later, I'd learned that the man had been on the run for days. That tarp in the back. It wasn't junk. It was his last victim, wrapped up like garbage. It's 2:13 a.m., and I'm standing behind the counter of a gas station off Route 49, dead in the middle of nowhere. It's the kind of place that only exists in 2 states, quiet or unnervingly quiet. No in between. And tonight was unnervingly quiet. I never wanted this job. I mean, who dreams of becoming a night shift gas station clerk? But bells have a way of making you reconsider your life choices. So here I was, sleep deprived, caffeinated, and counting down the minutes until dawn. It was a routine night until a car pulled up to pump 6, headlights off. Weird. People don't usually roll in without lights on unless they're drunk or broken down. A man got out. He was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled so far over his face that I couldn't see his eyes. I've seen all sorts of sketchy characters in my time, so I didn't think much of it. Maybe just another guy too proud to ask for directions or buying snacks at an ungodly hour. Except he didn't head toward the door. He just stood by the pump, staring at the station. Now, I wasn't about to go outside and play detective. If he needed help, he'd come in and ask. Still, something about the way he just lingered made my skin crawl. I pretended to be busy with inventory, glancing out every few seconds, but he didn't move. He just kept standing there. Then, he started walking. Slowly, but not toward the station door. He circled the building instead, disappearing behind the corner where the security cameras don't reach. At this point, my nerves were shot. The air in the station felt thick. I tapped the screen, checking the feed from the cameras, and sure enough, there he was, circling like a predator scoping out its prey. But he wasn't doing anything illegal, just being creepy as hell. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911 if things got any weirder. Suddenly, the automatic door slid open. But no one walked in. Great, I muttered, shaking my head. Now the door's malfunctioning too. I stood there, waiting for something, anything to happen. When nothing did, I stepped out from behind the counter and cautiously approached the door. Outside, the air was thick with that particular quiet you only get in the middle of nowhere, like the world had forgotten about this place. The door whooshed closed behind me, leaving just me and the empty parking lot. The guy was nowhere to be seen. The weirdness of the situation mixed with my rising adrenaline, and I took a deep breath. Calm down, man. It's probably nothing. Just some freak on a road trip trying to mess with your head. Then I heard it. A faint, metallic scraping noise coming from the side of the building. My instinct screamed at me to turn around and go back inside, but something pulled me toward the sound. I followed the wall of the station until I reached the back, where we keep the dumpsters. The man was crouched there, but it wasn't the sight of him that got me. It was what he was doing. He had a crowbar in his hand, prying at the metal lock of the station's back door. His movements were calm, methodical, like he had all the time in the world. I backed up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to be a hero, but I needed to stop him. Hey, I shouted, voice cracking slightly from nerves. The man froze, his back still to me. For a second, I thought he'd bolt, but he didn't. He stood up, his shoulders rising and falling like he was laughing silently. Without turning around, he raised the crowbar and slammed it against the lock again. The sound echoed in the night. I did the only thing I could think of, ran back inside and locked the front door. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and finally dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up, but before I could say a word, the power went out. Everything. Lights, cameras, register, gone. Darkness swallowed the gas station. Hello? Are you there? The voice from the phone crackled, but the signal was dead. I stood there in pitch black, gripping my phone like a lifeline, and that's when I heard the door creak open. Not the front door, but the one leading into the storage room, inside the station. Someone was in here with me. I scrambled behind the counter, looking for something, anything, I could use to defend myself. All I found was the sad little box cutter I used to open shipments. Perfect. I flipped it open and held it out in front of me like it was a damn sword, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whoever was in the store could hear it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, just a few feet away. "Whoever you are, man," I called the cops. I shouted, my voice betraying the fear I was trying to mask. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I didn't dare move, didn't even breathe. I could barely make out the figure standing at the end of the aisle, just behind the shelves. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. I gripped the box cutter tighter, my hands slick with sweat. Another step. I raised the cutter higher, preparing for the worst. But before I could react, he spoke. And it wasn't what I expected. "Hey, man, you got any Funyuns?" I blinked. "What?" The figure stepped into the dim light spilling in from the street lamps outside. It wasn't the guy from the car. It was a scruffy-looking teenager, maybe 19, holding a pack of beef jerky in one hand and a Mountain Dew in the other. He raised an eyebrow at my box cutter. "You good, bro?" For a second, I didn't know what to say. My brain was still in fight or flight mode, but this kid just wanted snacks. I lowered the box cutter, my heart still racing, and nodded toward the chips aisle. "Yeah, they're over there." "Cool, thanks." He wandered off like nothing was wrong, leaving me standing there in the aftermath of what felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life. I waited until he left, watched him drive off, and then did what any reasonable person would do. I quit. You ever have one of those shifts where you're absolutely convinced you're going to die of boredom? That was me, the night everything went sideways. It started like any other Tuesday graveyard shift at the gas station, quiet, dark, and with the subtle threat of a caffeine overdose hovering over me for my 5th cup of coffee. The clock had just struck midnight, which is when the real weirdos typically crawl out of the woodwork. Except, weirdly enough, that night was dead. No cars, no customers. Just me, a whole row of chips that somehow always needed restocking, and a truly unfortunate playlist of 80s soft rock playing over the speakers. The kind of stuff that makes you question all your life choices while surrounded by fluorescent lights and beef jerky. I was midway through contemplating whether I should switch from coffee to energy drinks when a car finally pulled up. A bright, candy apple red convertible. Now, let me tell you, this car stood out like a sore thumb in our tiny, middle-of-nowhere station, where most people drive beat-up trucks or minivans held together with hope. So, naturally, I was intrigued. The car door opened, and out stepped a guy in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a tuxedo. Yes, a tuxedo. At a gas station. At midnight. This was either going to be really interesting or the start of the weirdest robbery attempt I've ever seen. He strutted inside, clearly not concerned about the fact that he was a walking anomaly. The bell above the door jingled cheerily as he walked over to the counter. I was ready to hit him with the classic, "You coming from a wedding?" line, but before I could get a word out, he slapped a $100 bill on the counter and said, "I need all the duct tape you've got." I blinked. Did I hear him right? All the duct tape? He nodded, totally deadpan. All of it. I glanced around, making sure there wasn't a hidden camera somewhere, because this was starting to feel like a prank. "You need duct tape for your tux?" I asked, trying to keep a straight face. He smirked, and for a second, I thought maybe I was finally going to get an explanation for whatever fever dream I had stumbled into. Let's just say it's an emergency. Right. An emergency that required duct tape and involved wearing a tuxedo at a gas station. Got it. I sighed and pointed him toward the aisle. All the duct tape we have is over there. But I gotta tell you, we've only got like 3 rolls, so if you were planning to, I don't know, tape up a broken boat or a runaway elephant, you're out of luck. He gave me a half smile, grabbed all 3 rolls like his life depended on it, and then returned to the counter. This'll do. I rang him up, silently debating whether or not to ask any more questions. I mean, it's not every day someone in formal wear buys out your duct tape supply. But hey, Maybe he was into some DIY tuxedo repair. He handed me the 100, and I handed him his change, which he pocketed without counting. The guy really wasn't sweating the details. He was halfway to the door when I couldn't help myself anymore. "All right, man, you gotta tell me, what's with the tux?" He paused, glancing over his shoulder with a grin that could have sold ice to an Eskimo. "I lost a bet." And with that, he disappeared into the night. Now, any normal person would have chalked it up as a weird encounter and moved on. But me? No, I was left with the nagging suspicion that I had just witnessed the tip of a very bizarre iceberg. I went back to my spot behind the counter, shaking my head and trying to focus on the terrible music when, 10 minutes later, the door chimed again. This time, a woman walked in, soaking wet and carrying, get this, a single high heel in her hand. She was dressed in what looked like a cocktail dress, but her makeup was smudged, her hair was plastered to her face from the rain, and she had this look in her eyes like she was one bad joke away from losing it completely. Without saying a word, she marched up to the counter, slammed the heel down like it was a declaration of war, and asked, "Did a guy in a tux come in here?" I stared at her for a second, wondering if I was being pumped twice in one night. Yeah. Just left, actually. She sighed deeply, like this was the exact answer she was dreading. Of course he did. She looked around the store like she was debating something. Then, without explanation, she grabbed a pack of gum and tossed it on the counter. "I'll take this." "Right, gum." I scanned it, resisting the urge to ask a million questions. She handed me a crumpled $5 bill, and I handed her the change, which she also didn't count before pocketing it. "So, are you chasing him, or?" She cut me off with a wave of her hand. Let's just say I also lost a bet. Now I was really intrigued. What kind of bet results in tuxedos, duct tape, and wet heels? She looked at me for a moment, considering whether or not I was worth the explanation. Apparently, I wasn't, because she just shook her head and muttered, "The worst kind." Before I could get another word out, she was gone, leaving behind a trail of wet footprints and a cloud of mystery. So there I was, alone again, with nothing but a half-eaten sandwich and more questions than I'd started the night with. I glanced at the security footage, watching as the woman got into a bright blue car that had apparently been parked just out of sight. She sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel like she was giving herself a pep talk. Then, without warning, she floored it out of the lot, disappearing into the night. I didn't know what had just happened, but I had a strong feeling I'd just witnessed the aftermath of a seriously wild night. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd gotten caught in the middle of some absurd, tuxedo-fueled disaster. But hey, at least it was a change from the usual guy walks in for smokes and complains about gas prices routine. Just when I thought it couldn't get any weirder, the door chimed one last time. This time, it was a guy in a Hawaiian shirt, sunglasses, even though it was pitch black outside, and, wait for it, a full snorkel mask hanging around his neck. I stared at him as he casually walked over to the drinks section, grabbed a bottle of water, and brought it to the counter like this was the most normal thing in the world. He looked at me and grinned. "Let me guess, tuxedo guy came through here." I blinked. Yeah. How'd you?" "Don't ask," he said, handing me a $10 bill. "Let's just say I won the bet."